Thank you, Mark. Can everybody hear me? All right, let me share my screen. Are you all seeing a PowerPoint slide? Actually,
Yes.
It's a Google slide because I4J loves the G Suite. All right, well, thank you for having me this morning. It's always a pleasure to meet with this group and to talk about the work of I4J. This is actually our third year presenting to the Board of Visitors, so I'm going to assume that most of you remember a little bit something about what the program is up to. In short, we are a social justice innovation lab that designs, builds, and tests disruptive solutions to the justice gap. One big change since last year, we are now a virtual social justice innovation lab, designing, building, and testing disruptive solutions to the justice gap during a pandemic. I'm going to try to focus today on what COVID has meant for I4J and how we've responded. Not surprisingly, the deep and wide justice gap that we already had in this country before COVID has only worsened. Even before COVID, debt collection was the single most common type of litigation in this country, and half of that debt is medical debt. So we can expect, as we emerge from the pandemic, to see a dramatic increase in medical debt collection lawsuits, which is going to put a real burden on our civil legal system. We had an eviction crisis in this country before COVID, but to put that crisis in context, pre-COVID, we were seeing 3.6 million evictions per year. We have now 30 to 40 million Americans at risk of eviction during COVID. Domestic violence reporting has dropped by 50%. That's not because domestic violence is on the decrease. In fact, research says that domestic violence is increasing during COVID, but we have taken away the opportunity for survivors to report because our schools and community centers are closed. And finally, courts have had to very quickly adapt to COVID by moving online. And I know a lot of people in this room are already probably painfully familiar of that rapid adaptation. But that move to technology in our court system is happening in a world in which 25% of our communities of color only have access to the internet through their smartphone. That's compared to 10% of our white communities. So this is my call to action every year. We cannot train the next generation of lawyers for business as usual. Justice needs innovation. We made the switch to a virtual lab pretty easily at I4J because we were already leaning really hard on technology in the classroom. These are some of the tech tools we were using before COVID, which really helped us adapt to a virtual existence during COVID. So this is what our classroom looks like now. Often, this is Miro. This is a virtual whiteboarding tool, which you see here are students in the top there. They are journey mapping the medical debt collection experience. On the bottom left, they are preparing for interviews in the community. And then on the bottom right, they're setting their guiding design principles for their work over the course of the project. But this is also what our classroom looks like. And for me, this has been one of the joys of COVID is that our communications platform, Slack, which we were using before COVID, has really become a space that has diminished the line between classroom and home. So our students have really been able to share, whether it's a baby standing up for the first time during class or silly pet photos or recipes or books and movie recommendations. We've really, really built out a community through the use of technology in the classroom. We have 11 projects in the lab right now, and I wanted to just update you on 2 of the projects that I shared with you this time last year. The first of those is our licensed legal advocate pilot. So this pilot is a partnership with the Arizona Supreme Court. We are training advocates at a domestic violence service provider to be able to give limited scope legal advice to survivors. This is happening under Arizona's regulatory reform effort, and it is the first pilot in the country that is going to permit non-lawyer legal advice in the nonprofit sector. I'm very happy to share this pilot has launched. Our advocates are training now. This is our kickoff meeting. And one of the things that makes me so happy about this pilot is, with the exception of one member of our research team not pictured here, the advocates, their faculty, their supervisors, and the research team are all women and predominantly women of color. And this group has just been amazing to work with, brave humans, all of them. And I know we have at least one person in this photo who's in the room with us today, and I'm really excited to work with her. The second project I talked about last year was our usability testing of online dispute resolution. So this project asked the research question, okay, courts are starting to use this online platform, online dispute resolution for civil cases. But do we know whether, particularly for defendants in debt collection, our most common type of civil litigation in this country, is that technology usable and accessible? This research project was the first in the country to evaluate the usability of online dispute resolution. I'm happy to report this is also published. We have a super not user-friendly URL for this report that you'll see at the bottom of your screen. It's also available on the I4J website. But I wanted to share with you a little bit about how this project was run in the community. We ran this project with Utah. We had access to Utah's online dispute resolution platform. They gave us a test environment of that platform. We went and did observation-based usability testing in the low-income community. So we put the tool in the hands of the people who might someday need it. And we measured things like, did they commit critical errors in their use of the platform? How long did it take them to complete tasks? How satisfied were they with the process? Then we took all of the findings from that initial test back into the community and ran a series of participatory design workshops. These were workshops with the low-income community where we asked them to help us redesign the platform to make it better. We presented some of the issues we were seeing with the platform, and they contributed their ideas to how it could be improved. Based on those workshops, we rebuilt the platform in a software called Adobe XD. So we created a new prototype version of online dispute resolution, and we took it out into the community again and tested it using the same test metrics from the baseline. We had some really interesting findings on this project. And the short version is that when you involve users or the community for whom a tool is built in the building process, in the design process, you see really, really great outcomes. So for example, users of that second tool, the prototype tool that was redesigned with the community, were able to complete tasks 52% faster. They had 59% fewer non-critical errors and 93% fewer critical errors. So critical error is an error that would cause someone to disengage with the legal system, to give up and walk away from ODR. All participants reported higher post-test satisfaction and much higher rates of comprehension of their legal rights and satisfaction with the outcome of their case. New to the lab this year, since I last spoke with you all, is our cost of eviction calculator. We started this project pre-COVID because Tucson was a top 25 evicting city. We had been working on the issue of eviction in this community for some time. 15% of the renters in our community were experiencing eviction. And we were interested in the fact that there was really no transparency to the downstream costs of eviction. So communities bear a significant community cost for eviction across rehousing evicted families, providing them with medical care and mental health care, dealing with the child welfare and juvenile delinquency issues that follow eviction. And so this tech tool was designed to aggregate those costs for any community in the country. Now, this is the landing page of the tool. And there's the URL if you want to go online and play with it. Basically, it asks you to know, you need to know how many evictions are filed in your community, and then asks you a series of questions to see if you know any other data about your community. If you don't, it will input national or localized data sets where available, and it will generate a report for you about what your community is spending on evictions each year. Shortly after we built that tool, which we built for the Georgetown Iron Tech competition, it made the finals of that competition. We published this report with 8 other research institutions trying to sound the alarm about how serious the eviction crisis is during COVID. This report became one of the most cited pieces of research this past summer about housing risks during COVID. And so we saw an opportunity here while we had the attention of decision makers and we were making some noise about eviction, that we could repurpose the calculator. So that's what we did. Now, instead of using historic eviction filing data, you can input the number of people at risk of eviction in your community due to COVID. You can put that number into the calculator, and it will tell you how much your community is about to spend if it doesn't get its eviction problem under control during COVID. After the calculator was revised in this way, we published this cost of COVID-19 evictions report with the National Low Income Housing Coalition. There's the URL if you want to look at this online. This report does a 50-state survey of what eviction is going to cost state by state if we don't do something about the eviction crisis during COVID. I want to take a minute and just give a big shout out to our program manager, Mackenzie Pish, who has really driven our eviction work. And to me, this is an example of one of the major goals of I4J is we want to produce change makers. Mackenzie took all of the graduate courses in I4J. She was our Snell and Wilmer John Bauma Fellow in her third year. She is shaping the national conversation about eviction during COVID in her first year out of law school and had her first New York Times site on the first of this year. So it has just been awesome to watch her really take off. And she's leveraging research and technology to really inform the country about how serious the eviction problem is during COVID. The other big project that we're doing right now that is new since I last spoke with you is our legal empowerment for people experiencing medical debt. We are spending a full year on this project. We chose the topic of medical debt because, as I mentioned, the most common type of debt, the most common type of civil litigation, also a leading cause of foreclosure and bankruptcy. So again, that focus on the downstream consequences of a civil legal problem, and a serious user disengagement issue. In some jurisdictions, 70% of debt collection defendants don't engage with the civil legal system when they're sued for debt collection. There's also a serious inequality happening in the medical debt space. It reinforces the wealth gap between white communities and communities of color, and that default judgment, that disengagement problem, much more severe in communities of color. We are running this project in Utah because Utah, like Arizona, is a reg reform state. They are the two states in the country right now willing to reevaluate unauthorized practice of law restrictions. So that means that people in Utah with specialized legal training, but not a JD, could be empowered to help our particularly low-income population with their unrecognized civil justice issues. This will make Utah one of the first states to create opportunities for the nonprofit sector to provide legal services directly to those they serve. All of our projects use a combination of design and systems thinking, and I have talked about this methodology every year, so I won't hammer on it now, but this is the design thinking framework. We are layering onto this systems thinking, so really getting out into the community, doing a ton of community engaged research, looking for those opportunities to leverage and deliver high impact projects. So what that means in practice, though, is a huge amount of community engagement on the medical debt project. We have spoken to over 30 nonprofit organizations, 14 subject matter experts from the legal field. We have a team of about 14 lived experience experts, so people in the community who are experiencing medical debt. We compensate them for their time. They consult on the project. 6 healthcare providers and 5 subject matter experts in the area of health law policy. What we're going to see coming out of this project so far are 3 proposed pilots to launch in the field. The first is a court-sanctioned medical debt diversion program. So this will have non-lawyer advocates who will intervene just before a lawsuit is filed and try to provide advocacy assistance to defendants. We are training a community of bilingual community healthcare workers to be able to augment their services with the provision of limited scope legal advice. And we're partnering with an educational institution in Utah to train social work students with a bachelor's in social work to be able to provide limited scope legal advice about medical debt when they graduate and become the frontline staff at social services. If you want to know more about our medical debt work, here is our interim report that was just published on January 4th, and there's the URL for that report. I also just want to say that because we are so busy and we have so many good things going on, I'm really thrilled to report that we are also growing. So we added a 5th course to the lab this year, led by Professor Chris Griffin. So expanding our work on evaluation of access to justice solutions. We anticipate adding a 6th course focusing on that usability testing starting this fall. If you had gone to the I4J website this time last year, the Who We Are section was, well, just me. But I'm very happy that this website now has our whole team. So Judge Karen Adam is leading the curriculum development for our licensed legal advocate pilot. Mackenzie, who I've already raved about here, full-time program manager for I4J. Jessica Finley, a research scholar at U of A, also program manager on our licensed legal advocate pilot. Chris Griffin leading all of our evaluation efforts. And Sarah Maue, who you may know as the daughter of Professor Tom Maue, is leading our UX efforts. We all continue to rely on the expertise and guidance of our advisory board, including Judge Cruz, who's with us today. We have a new advisory board member, Chris Robertson, formerly with U of A Law, broke her heart to move to Boston, but still continues to be very involved with I4J, which has been wonderful. And I also want to recognize our leadership students. So these are students who have already been through at least one I4J course, and they are now working in the lab to help keep all of the projects spinning. All 6 of these students are working on our medical debt project, and they are doing really exciting work, helping organizations get into the Utah regulatory sandbox, helping those organizations with grant writing, learning a lot about regulatory compliance in a new regulatory reform world, doing analysis of court data. All of them are fantastic project managers at this point, and also really skilled at qualitative interviewing in the community, particularly with vulnerable populations. So I love every single minute I get to spend working with this team. I also just want to recognize our sponsors. So we couldn't do this work without the infrastructure support that allows us to take technology out into the low-income community, that allows us to pay students to work in the lab both during the school year and during the summer, supports our cost of eviction calculator. So all of these early adopters of I4J have really made all the difference in the program's growth over these first 3 years. I don't know how I'm doing on time, but I'm happy to take a few minutes for questions unless we need to move on.